All right. Welcome, everyone. Nice to see you. It's February already. Exactly. So this is the Robert Lunz Group of the Sierra Club. We've been in the Charleston area for a long time. Probably 40 plus years. We've got over 1,400 members in Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester, and Colleton counties. And we've added something new to our welcome slide. And let me get this out of the way so I can see it. So we're on the traditional lands of the Ashpoo, Awada, Seaweed, Bohicket, Catawba, Combahee, Coosaw, Edisto, Ituan, Kiowa, Pee, Shem, Stono, Wando, Wapu, Wasamasa, yeah, and Winya nations. So, it's 4 counties, and these tribes overlapped their areas, and we're here at various times. So there is a map out there where it's online, and you can go figure this out for any place in the United States. Okay. So our volunteer leadership, I'm Christine Von Collins. I'm the chair of the local group. Let's see, we've got some, Pat is here. She's our membership chair, and Nina, she puts our programs together. So thank you. Star is online, and he runs the Zoom from home. He does our website. He's our outings leader chair. He does other social media for us. And Laura's at home. She is our publicity chair. Alec does our newsletter. Is Jean in the audience? She may be online. She is our treasurer. Thank you all. And if you want to be a volunteer, come on. We've got positions open. We've got general position on the XCOM committee. We're going into a very heightened political season. If you're interested in politics, let us know. And we could use a conservation chair. All right, outings. Star is going to unmute himself at home and talk about the outings.
Well, I'm going to start off by saying that this weekend, Amanda Vogus is going to do something. So Amanda, do you want to tell everybody about this?
Yeah, sure. So this Saturday is the 17th annual Francis Marion National Forest cleanup. So I decided I'm gonna go do this, and I would love to have some other Sierra Club members join me. It's a lot of fun. We kind of all split up and tackle different areas around the National Forest to pick up any trash and litter along the highway or those side streets. And yeah, I'll be there at the sign-in table. The address is on the Palmetto Pride website, but we also shared it on Meetup, Facebook, and Campfire as well. So I'll be wearing a Black Sierra Club hat and be standing by the sign-in table. We can just group together and divide and conquer.
Thanks, Amanda. Amanda's one of our new outings leaders, and I'll keep saying that for the next 15 years. Next weekend, not this coming weekend, but the next weekend, we're going to have sort of a camp out at the Santee Coastal Reserve, one of the most important birding areas on the East Coast, and an absolutely beautiful place to experience in winter. And we're going to take a couple of different hikes. On Saturday afternoon, we're going to do maybe the Green Trail and possibly part of the Red Trail, and possibly go up and look at the ruins of El Dorado. And then on Sunday, we'll mostly spend the day doing the Cape Trail. Bill Turner will take you. This is an overnight camping trip, but if you want to come, the Sandy Coastal Reserve is an overnight camping trip. If you want to come up Saturday and spend the night till Sunday morning, that's fine. If you want to come up Saturday, or if you want to come up Sunday, that's okay too. Details to be revealed on Campfire. Bill Turner's leading a hike at the Donnelly Wildlife Management Area, another outstandingly beautiful place for all of you to come out and visit. Both of these hiking experiences are basically over flat ground, so if you can walk a few miles, you'll probably be just fine. Our oyster roast is coming up. Somebody else will talk about that later, and we've got stuff all the way through March and into the summer, and great outings over and over and over again. So watch and be amazed and join us.
Thank you, Amanda and Star. Who's going to Santee Coast Reserve? Woo! All right. Paul, you're not gonna go?
I don't know.
All right. Let me see if I can get this thing to work here. Get this one out of the way now. Okay. All right, we have our oyster roast coming up, and I know I've seen a lot of you in this audience there, so you know how good the oysters are at Bowen's Island. So come out and join us. We have tickets available. You can go to the Robert Lunz Group Sierra Club website, and it's on Eventbrite. So buy tickets ahead of time or buy them at the door. We're gonna have Ben and Jerry's ice cream. We'll have veggie dogs that we have pre-checked that they're good. We did a taste test, so we know that they're good veggie dogs. We'll have chili and lime in the coconuts will be playing some good tunes for us. So we'll also have a lot of auction items. So come on out and have fun. Nope, back. All right, there is going to be a Gadsden Creek panel discussion. This is another organization that's putting this on, and they've asked us to let you know about it. It's called Reimagining the Gadsden Creek Community, Daylighting the Science. It will be at Burke High School Auditorium, February 8th. That's this next Thursday at 6 p.m. So if you're interested in finding out what's going on with Gadsden Creek and their effort to try to save it, come on out and learn more about that. All right, Dr. Bosnecker, come on up. Got a quick announcement here.
Yeah, very quick announcement. I'm Dr. Bosnecker, paleontologist. I used to work here actually until last year. We just started up our new paleontological nonprofit, the Charleston Center for Paleontology. We were invited by Mr. Bill Turner in the back there, who used to volunteer for us at the museum before COVID. And he's thinking about doing it again, and we're looking for more volunteers. So if you're interested in helping pick little tiny shark and ray teeth out of matrix, put fossil whales and dolphins back together, either by gluing or cleaning off like limestone off their bones and teeth, or actually going out and digging up new fossils on our property out west of Somerville, please contact us, team@charlestoncenterforpaleo.org. We need help. So, which is always my plea at Mace Brown Museum. So anyway, glad to introduce us and let us know.
Maybe we can make it an outing. You hear that, outings leaders? Okay, we have call to actions every month for conservation. So we definitely, when you mitigate, adapt, and you are resilient to the climate crisis, one of the things you're doing is reducing your use of fossil fuels. So if you have a home of your own and you want to weatherize and do some home repair to that, here's some resources for that. We've got Brian Cordell at the Sustainability Institute. They have a lot on their website, but you can also contact them for more information on weatherization. They actually, many years ago now, they came to our home and just went up and down and all around our house. They did this thing called a blower door test, and they found that the air ducts were leaking in our house. So we had another contractor come in and fix them, and we saved a lot of money and a lot of energy. So you could be wasting money that you don't even know. We've got the federal government. They've got the Investment Reduction Act right now. They're giving away lots of money If you want solar on your house, if you want to put in a heat pump water heater, which is a really cool water heater that draws heat from the air even in winter, and it turns that heat from the air into hot water. So let's see, what else can you do? You can do all sorts of lighting in your house, appliances. They give you incentives to do all of this, and Dominion Energy also gives incentives to do all this. So you could actually get the tax rebates and the Dominion incentives and pay a lot less than you think you're going to pay. So look into it and see what you can get done. That out of the way. All right, voting season is upon us. Actually, Saturday, February 3rd is the South Carolina Democratic presidential primary. That's very soon. And the Republican presidential primary is Saturday, February 24th. So get out there and vote. All right, before we get to this month's program, we're going to talk about next month's program, just to let you know. All over the low country, there are septic tanks. A lot of them are being taken out because they really do leak and cause problems, and they get into the local waterways and cause problems. And there are developers that are developing larger communities that they want to put septic tanks in, new ones. So we already know these things cause problems. So why do we want more of them? So Leslie Lenhart from the South Carolina Environmental Law Project is going to come and talk to us about that and explain what's going on and what can be done about it. Okay, Dr. Richard Hall is here. He is the Associate Professor of Ecology at the University of Georgia and a board member of the Coney Rivers Audubon Society. And we had dinner. He's a great guy. He knows his birds. He already answered a lot of my questions, so welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
Gonna get rid of this one.
Switch over some presentations. I guess while we're loading up the presentation, I'll acknowledge that Athens is on the land of the Cherokee and Creek people. So that's where my yard is situated. And I'm going to tell you a little bit today about my journey, my adventures and misadventures in trying to create a wildlife-friendly and bird-friendly yard. All right.
There we go.
Everyone hear me okay at the back?
And if you have a question at home, put it on the chat and we will get to it at the end. Thank you.
Great.
Oh, and if you're at home, turn your screen off. It saves energy.
So as you might have guessed, even though I live in Athens, Georgia now, I'm from the South, but not from the American South. I grew up close to London in an era where we used to wear clothes like this that came back into fashion with the Barbie movie this last year. But from a very young age, I've always been really fascinated by birds. And luckily through my career, I ended up via a math degree and ended up in an ecology school at the University of Georgia. And part of my work now involves studying bird migration and interactions of birds and parasites. So I managed to kind of turn my boyhood passion into part of my job, which is very gratifying. So I moved to Athens in 2009, and a year later found myself for the first time in my life able to buy a house. And I thought, I really want to attract lots of birds to my yard. So there's lots of reasons for doing this. On the conservation side, some of you may know that birds are undergoing pretty precipitous declines. It's been estimated that we've lost about 1 in 4 of all North American birds since the 1970s. And so there's lots of things that we can do to bring them back, which includes, of course, restoring and maintaining habitat. And even around our yards, we can do this. Even on very small scales, if we all do this collectively, we can create quite a lot of bird and wildlife friendly habitat. But attracting birds to your yard and creating habitat for birds isn't just good for the birds, it's good for us too. Increasingly, there's been a lot of social science studies showing that birds are pretty good for our well-being. So in Europe, studies have found that more bird species close to where people live increases people's life satisfaction as much as a higher income. And there was a recent study that used smartphones to sort of track people's emotional state and mental well-being. And they found that seeing or hearing birds improved people's mental well-being for up to 8 hours. So, who needs Viagra? Birds really came into sharp focus, I think, in the early pandemic when a lot of people were primarily staying home or just taking walks in their neighborhood. I think suddenly a lot of people started paying attention to all the wildlife we have around our homes. So it became increasingly popular. This was true of my niece. That's my niece back in the UK. And I thought she did a pretty great drawing of this Eurasian robin that was in my grandparents' yard. So if you want to attract birds, native plants are a really good idea. And one of the reasons for this is that many of our songbirds, even if you see them in different seasons eating seeds at a feeder, things like chickadees, in the summer, they really want to feed caterpillars to their offspring. And they really need many thousands of caterpillars to successfully raise young. So birds like eastern bluebirds and these cute little eastern phoebe babies kind of lined up back to front there, they really need to have caterpillars for their development and early survival. And if you want to have caterpillars and lots of them, then you need to have food plants that caterpillars can feed on. And we all know plants have evolved a bunch of defenses against herbivory, but native plants and native caterpillars sort of co-evolve. So there are usually caterpillars that can overcome the defenses of these plants, and non-native exotic plants, even though they can provide nectar for adult butterflies and moths, they're not necessarily suitable as breeding grounds. So no native plants, you're not going to have many caterpillars, and as a result, you're not going to see as many birds. Thought I'd do a quick quiz here. Who can name the caterpillar and the plant association?
Monarch.
Monarch butterflies, and they eat
Milkweed.
milkweeds. Yep. So there's an adult nectaring on some blue mist. What about this caterpillar? Yep, it's a black swallowtail, and they eat many things in the parsley family. This was on a plant called wild parsnip or zizia, another native plant. Here's a bit of a head scratcher. I didn't know which one this is. Does anyone recognize this caterpillar? Kind of looks like the very hungry caterpillar from the kids' books. It's a long-tailed skipper, and it was on a plant called Desmodium or tick trefoil in my yard there. So someone actually quantified that. There was a study done by Desiree Narango in DC, metropolitan DC area, and she tracked the fate of chickadee nests in urban backyards in this area, and she quantified things like nest success, nest productivity in relation to the proportion cover of native plants. And her findings showed that chickadee populations were being maintained or growing in yards that had at least 70% native vegetation. So if you want to have persistent populations of birds like chickadees, then we should really be aiming to kind of ramp up the proportion of native plants in our yards. So I'm hoping I can convince you today that a well-designed backyard, even a very small one, can provide year-round interest for birds, from year-round residents like northern cardinals that might be eating insects like this moth in the summer and switching over to seeds more in the winter, to winter visitors like these fruit-eating cedar waxwings. We talked about this at dinner. This is a bird that likes to hang around in groups. It's a very social bird. To summer breeders, and in the Piedmont region of Georgia, we're lucky to have birds like wood thrush and summer tanager that breed with us. But we also, our yards can also serve as way stations for birds on much longer journeys. So these migratory warblers, many of which spent the winter in Central or South America, and might be going as far as the Appalachians, or might be going all the way up to the boreal forests of Canada to spend the summer. And they'll readily stop over in a yard that provides insects for them. So this is my yard. You know, I arrived here from the UK. I didn't really know any of my plants when I first moved here. But when I bought the house, I thought this, you know, this has trees, it's got canopy complexity, so it's probably going to be good for birds. So I called in a friend who was a landscape architect, and I said, would you mind walking around the yard with me and just telling me, you know, what are the good plants that I should keep? And, you know, what are the invasives that I should probably be getting rid of? And we wandered around the yard, and my friend didn't say anything. And it turned out I had the full suite of kind of classic invasives we see in the Southeast, from English ivy to bamboo to Chinese privet to Japanese honeysuckle to wisteria to Elaeagnus. In fact, she said the only thing I could keep were the water oaks. So, you know, I thought, well, this is good. I've got a blank canvas. I can design my yard from the ground up. So how do I find out about native plants? Luckily, there's a lot of really great, easy online resources. If you're looking for bird and wildlife friendly plants, I'd recommend looking at the website Plants for Birds. Just Google Plants for Birds. It takes you to this website. In that drop-down menu in the bottom left there, you can enter your email address to get in contact with them, or you can punch in your zip code. And I punched in a zip code for sort of Charleston area, and it told us that the nearest Audubon Society that might offer native plant services is the Charleston Audubon Charleston Natural History Society. And it comes up with a list of plants that are native to this area, and it tells you a little bit about you know, their sun and water needs, whether they produce fruit or flowers, and what kinds of wildlife they support. So Plants for Birds is a really good resource for finding out what might work well in your local area. Another thing you can do is various organizations. So in Georgia, our various chapters of Audubon will do this, but the National Wildlife Federation has this too. There are various organizations where you can get your yard certified. And with our Audubon program in Georgia, we have a couple of people that know their native plants really well, will sort of tour your yard and give you advice on how to improve it for wildlife. And at the end of this process, you get a little certificate or sign like this. And these signs are a great idea, not for bragging rights, but what I've found is I've got my Georgia Audubon sign sort of posted outside my house. And I think what it does is it signals to people that, you know, my front yard to some people might look a little overgrown, a little less formal, a little less curated than a lawn. And I think what these signs do, they kind of indicate that this is intentional, that this is for supporting wildlife. And it gets kind of people interested in this idea. How do I get my yard certified as a wildlife sanctuary? So hopefully it becomes contagious. There's a lot of native plant nurseries around. I just briefly looked for some in the Charleston area, and I came up with Roots and Shoots Nursery that seemed to be a primarily native nursery. But there are also organizations that will organize native plant sales, like the South Carolina Native Plant Society, or you might find informally gardening clubs will do seed swaps and such. But spring and fall are great times to plant these native plants. So, you know, be looking out for those in the coming months. So I went to a native plant sale and I got pretty carried away. So went to this sale and completely filled my tiny car with plants and got them all home. And, you know, it just looked like a drop in an ocean. So, of course, I went straight back and got a whole lot more plants. So now I had a reasonable number of plants, and I went to break ground, and I learned my first lesson about gardening, in the Georgia Piedmont, we have slightly different soil from here. You have lovely, nice, soft, sandy soil. We have hard red clay. This is October, which was a very dry month. So I bought all these plants. I went to break ground, and I don't think I got half an inch into that dirt. So I should have listened to the wisdom of the Phoebe, and I should have started small and learned a little bit about my soil type. And if you live in a sort of challenging soil environment like the Georgia Piedmont, creating raised beds is your friend. So start small. So if you want to create a yard that's really attractive to birds, you really want to think about all the things that a bird would need. So they not only need different kinds of food depending on their diet type, but birds need water to drink, but also to bathe. Feather maintenance is really important. They'll need shelter from extreme weather and also from predators, and they'll need structures that are suitable for them to build nesting sites. So I'm going to go through in the next sort of 10 minutes or so. I'm going to give you some examples of native plants that have worked pretty well in my yard. Not all of those are necessarily going to work in the Charleston area because we're in a slightly different growing region. Many of them will, but the idea is that you'll want to kind of create a mix of structures, sizes and structures of plants. The more diversity of flowering plants, kind of woody shrubs, mid-sized trees you have, the more diverse the collection of birds you're going to get. So what I really want to urge you to do is try and think about making your yard as 3D as possible. This lawn looks very nice and very neat, but it's pretty much a monoculture, and only a small subset of birds are able to use that structure. So mixes of vegetation are going to support the highest diversity of insects and therefore birds. So a wildlife-friendly yard might have a structure more like this, where you can still make it look very intentional by creating beds that are bordered with areas of lawns. You don't have to eradicate all of your lawn if you like your lawn, but you can use it as a tool to kind of showcase flower beds. And again, having these structures of kind of mid-sized shrubs and smaller trees and even large trees if you have the space in your yard. And features like rock piles and water bodies will also enhance the biodiversity value of your yard. So I'm going to go through a few different kind of types of birds that we might see here in the southeastern US and the kinds of food that they like. So in the winter, you might see large roving flocks of black birds. And these can be things like common grackles. Sometimes we have flocks of thousands of common grackles in the Athens area, and they're seed eaters. They've got large, powerful bills, so they can actually crush acorns with their bills. If you're very lucky, you might get birds like this rusty blackbird, which is a species that's undergone 90% declines throughout its breeding range, but we have quite a lot of them wintering here in the southeast, and they really like to eat pecans. And I found that they also like to cheat, so we have pecan trees overhanging our road, and they wait till the cars have run over them, and so there's some ready-made trail mix for them. A sign that birds like to eat seeds, birds like finches and sparrows eat a lot of seeds, and so they tend to have conical bills, like pretty fat bills at the base, not very long and pointed, which is typical of an insect eater. And American goldfinches are pretty unique in that they really like to eat seeds year round, including feeding seeds to their young. They actually breed a little bit later than a lot of other songbirds that are trying to keep track of insect emergence. These birds are actually timing their reproduction around the time that a lot of flowers like coneflowers or black-eyed Susans might be setting seed. And importantly, I think you'll see this when you see some pictures of my yard. A wildlife-friendly yard, it's okay if, at least in places, you leave it a little bit messy. It's intentional. And so once your coneflowers and your black-eyed Susans have gone to seed, don't deadhead them immediately. Leave at least some of those seed heads around, because birds will use those seed heads throughout the winter. This is a bird called a pine siskin. They come down to our area in variable numbers from year to year. Some years there's hardly any, some years they'll show up in their hundreds. And in one of these big invasion years of siskins, about 100 of them descended on my yard and completely demolished the remaining coneflower seeds. But these birds were hungry, and these seeds were able to sustain them through the winter. And I even sometimes, even though I live in a very wooded area in the middle of town, I'll sometimes get open country birds like savanna sparrows, which are more kind of birds of fields, or you might see them here in marshes. But one of them on migration again found my yard and was very happy, sort of chowing down on coneflower seeds. A favorite bird of a lot of gardeners here in the US is the hummingbird. We just have one breeding species of hummingbird in the eastern US, ruby-throated hummingbirds. And what I like to do is try and make sure that there are plants that hummingbirds like to feed on from the time they arrive until they depart for their full migration. So they can be supported through the whole season. A good clue that a plant is a hummingbird plant is that they're often red in color and they're long and tubular. So hummingbirds have co-evolutionary relationships with a lot of these plants, where the hummingbird sticks its bill into this, here in this case, a columbine, and there's usually some structure where pollen will be deposited onto the forehead of the hummingbird. So as it moves around these plants, it's going to be depositing pollen as it goes. So in Athens, columbines get going in early March, right as the hummingbirds are coming back. And this plant on the right is Indian pink, which is a plant in Athens that flowers in April and can again in the summer, in the middle of June. My favorite summer plant for these is the scarlet bee balm, and I start to see a lot of baby hummingbirds. This is a young male with just a little hint of his ruby throat to come. And you can see the bird on the right looks like it's got a golden forehead, and again that's because it's been visiting lots of plants and picking up lots of pollen. In the fall, cardinal flower is a great flower, and one of my favorites is coral honeysuckle, which will grow here at the coast as well. In mild winters, it will stay green through the winter and can have flowers on it pretty much in any season. So can support your ruby-throated hummingbirds the whole time that they're here. I told you we only have one breeding hummingbird, but increasingly, I think as a consequence of both climate warming and also warmer winters that mean that there's insects available all through the winter and lots of flowering plants in the winter, we'll occasionally see hummingbirds show up in the winter in Georgia. And one year I had two show up all at once, this little black-chinned hummingbird on the left and a female rufous hummingbird on the right. So we're seeing these birds increasingly. And you know, I put out a hummingbird feeder in the winter, but hummingbirds don't just feed on flowers. They need protein too, so they need to eat insects. That needs to be part of their diet. And what I found was that these my native plants, like the stems, the dead stems of the coneflowers that I'd left in place, the hummingbirds really like to perch on these. They sheltered from them in kind of cold winter weather, and they also served as places that the hummingbirds would be foraging and gleaning for insects all through the winter. A lot of birds like to eat fruit, especially during migration. It really helps power migration. And so a few of my, and different plants are going to produce fruit in different seasons. In the spring and the summer, things like red mulberry and blueberry, as well as cherries and elderberries, are great choices for birds like cedar waxwings as they're heading back north. Red mulberries are a real favorite with birds like rose-breasted grosbeaks and yellow-breasted chats. And you might end up seeing scenes like this. This bird is called a red-eyed vireo. It looks like it's a murderer, but all of this staining here is that the vireo, even though it's primarily an insect eater, on migration they'll fatten up on fruits like red mulberries and end up sort of looking pretty grisly as a result of that. In the fall, one of my favorite bird plants is called Devil's Walking Stick, so named because it's got a woody stem that's covered in sharp thorns. But it also produces a show of white flowers in the late summer when not much else is flowering. And so it's always covered in swallowtail butterflies and bees. But after those flowers are done, it produces these small purplish elderberry-like berries that are very popular with birds like mockingbirds. And there's a brown thrasher waiting in the wings for that mockingbird to finish up. As well as some birds that just migrate through our region on their way to the tropics, like the Swainson's thrush. So if you want to feed insectivorous birds, it turns out not all native plants are equal in the abundance and diversity of caterpillars they support. So some trees are really caterpillar superfoods. They support really diverse kinds of caterpillars through multiple different seasons. And so, yeah, oaks in particular are going to be great if you want to attract warblers like these northern parulas and chestnut-sided warblers, but also resident birds in our area like Carolina wrens. Although a lot of insect-eating birds like to forage in the treetops, there's another group of insectivorous birds that are typically feeding below head height in sort of perennial flowering plants. So that would include birds like prairie warblers and Tennessee warblers. The prairie warblers breed with us, but Tennessee warblers and Nashville warblers are just migrating through, and they really love the goldenrods in my yard, but they'll also use really anything in the aster family to glean caterpillars from. As they move through in September. And then several species will only be foraging for insects on the ground. We've got 3 different species here, and maybe to an untrained eye, these all look the same. You might be lamenting, how will I ever get into birds? They all look the same. I think this is an example of camouflage. So even though these birds aren't very closely related to each other, and they occur in our region in quite different seasons, so the hermit thrushes are only here in the winter, the ovenbirds are migrating through where our thrushes are here year round. I think that kind of brown plumage with the kind of speckled chest here blends in pretty well on a sort of dappled light of a forest floor. But these birds are looking for insects on the ground primarily. And so, you know, a great place that insects like to hide, especially through the winter months, is in leaf litter. So, you know, please don't be overly tidy with your leaves or, you know, clear the places you want to clear of leaves, but maybe keep some leaf piles in your yard rather than exporting them somewhere else. This leaf litter is full of overwintering insects that support birds and turn into pollinators the following season. And then similarly, these birds will readily forage in lawns, but they'll only be successful in that foraging if there's food for them there. So please go a little easy on the lawn care. And, you know, it's okay to let some other species grow into your lawn as well. I have some clover that pops up in mine, and that can be a good kind of early food source for the first emerging bumblebees. So I mentioned, as well as food, you should be thinking about what other habitat features that birds might use. So you can take your yard litter, you know, if you have a big storm here and lots of branches fall, you can pile up all those branches to create what's called a brush pile. And these brush piles can be great places. Some birds will roost in them, some birds will glean insects from the dead wood. But especially they can be great for a bird to dart into if there's a predator around. So if you've got a pretty open space in your yard, creating a brush pile creates a little escape hatch for a bird like this white-throated sparrow to zoom into if it sees a hawk or a cat. If it is safe to do so, dead trees are extremely valuable for wildlife. Of course, it's not appropriate to do this in every setting, but if you have a tree that isn't going to threaten your property or your neighbor's property, keeping as much of the tree as you can is going to provide lots of different functions for birds. So it can act as a snag or a lookout post. If you look at the top of this dead tree that was in my front yard, it rotted away in the end. But at the very top of that, there's a little dark blob, and that turned out to be a Mississippi kite, so an insect-eating bird of prey. They hunt dragonflies and cicadas, large insects on the wing, and so they really like these tall, dead perches to kind of look for prey. And these dead trees can also act as a scaffold for vines, vines like Virginia creeper. And Virginia creeper is a really popular plant with migratory birds in the fall. What we've got here is two Swainson's thrushes that breed up in Canada, winter down from Mexico down to northern South America. And they ate every single one of my Virginia creeper berries. I think here you're seeing the very last Virginia creeper berry being stolen away from a very indignant looking Swainson thrush here. And the soft wood of dead snags is excellent for birds that excavate their nests, for cavity nesters. Birds like the brown-headed nuthatch, a tiny little bird that sounds like a kind of squeaky dog toy, that its entire world range is in the southeastern US, and they rely on this soft wood to feed on. If you don't have trees, or it's not appropriate for you to have dead trees, you can, of course, mimic dead tree cavities by putting up a birdhouse. If you do mount one on a pole, I'd thoroughly recommend putting a device halfway up here, like a squirrel baffle that can keep out rat snakes, squirrels, or other potential nest usurpers and predators. Sorry, Gretchen, but you missed most of the talk. One thing, so lots of different birds have different habitat requirements, different heights or vegetation they like to hang out in. But a great equalizer from the point of view of birds is water. Every bird needs water. Even if they're getting most of the water they need from their diets for drinking, birds, feather maintenance is hugely important to birds, so they love to come in and bathe. And so putting in a water feature is going to attract the biggest sort of diversity of birds in your yard. And ideally, if you have some mechanism to get water moving in your yard, and this can be something as simple as putting like a little solar bubbler in a kind of dish of water, through to in my yard, I went a bit fancier, and I have a pond pump that circulates water down an 8-foot stream, and I think the sound and movement, the light reflected from that water helps the birds find it, and it's been a real magnet for birds. The other advantage of moving water, of course, is that can prevent mosquitoes breeding in it. And one of the biggest advantages is, if you've ever bought like a bird field guide or looked at a bird app, you'll see all these impossibly colored birds. And the reality is often these birds are hidden up in the treetops. But birds will come down to from the treetops when water's scarce on the landscape. They'll come down to bathe. So birds like scarlet tanagers and these rose-breasted grosbeaks, as well as migratory thrushes like veeries, will all come. They're pretty secretive normally, but they'll all come down to drink and bathe. And sometimes you'll even see very weird birds. I was looking out in my yard one day and I thought, that's a strange looking pigeon. I saw something that was about the size of a mourning dove, but it didn't look quite right. It turned out this bird was a yellow-billed cuckoo, and the last place you imagine seeing a yellow-billed cuckoo is on the ground. They're very arboreal. They love to eat caterpillars. Even though they're about dove-sized, they're pretty hard to see. And this bird, in a dry period, hopped right down into the open in a pond. And you'll sometimes even get larger birds like Cooper's hawks. Even owls will come down to bathe in ponds. And the biggest bird I ever had at my pond was a great blue heron. And I always found myself wondering what that lump in its throat was. Did it find a frog, or did one of my yard cardinals get very unlucky? Some of the favorite birds of bird watchers are these groups called the warblers. The North American warblers are a really diverse family. They sing beautiful songs, and they have this dazzling array of colors. And again, if you looked online or you looked in a field guide, you'll hear about birds like cerulean warbler. It's a gorgeous blue, blue-backed bird, really glows in the right light. But when you go out in the field, often this is your experience of a cerulean warbler. You're staring up against a backlit sky, and you're just seeing the underside of this bird for a split second as it flies off. And this kind of there's this phenomenon of birders that we spend so much of our time looking for warblers in the spring that there's a condition called warbler neck, where we end up with a crick in our neck from spending our whole time staring up into the treetops. You put a pond in and warbler neck will be a thing of the past. Warblers in particular really seem very drawn to these water features. So in spring, I'll see birds just passing through the Athens area, like Cape May warblers on their way to the boreal forests, redstarts, hooded warblers. Later in the season, I might see birds like magnolia warblers and Canada and bay-breasted warblers. Some of those warblers going kind of about as far north as you can imagine into Canada and Alaska. In the fall, some of these warblers have lost their breeding plumage, so they're not quite as boldly colored as the ones in the spring, but there's a lot more of them, and the water's even more attractive. In the Athens area, I would guess this is true of Charleston too, October can be a pretty dry month, so the water is really attractive to these birds. So I start to see not only one or two warblers, but sort of groups of warblers at a time, and some warblers that are really quite skulky that would ordinarily be quite difficult to see, like Connecticut warblers and Kentucky warblers. And one October day, this was shot a couple of falls ago now, but I looked out my window and there was just a constant stream of warblers using my pond. So we have here a black and white warbler, a Tennessee warbler. Here's a Cape May warbler that was displaced by a Wilson's warbler, which was displaced by a bay-breasted warbler fighting off another Cape May warbler, and a black-throated green warbler. It was hard to keep track with the number and diversity of birds that all came in over a period of just a few hours. And all of these birds are just transiently using the yard. They're hanging around for a day or two, at most a week, trying to refuel and fatten up before the next leap of their migratory journey. Yeah, here we've got another warbler, the yellow-throated warbler that breeds here in Charleston, being upstaged by eastern bluebirds, which is always a really pretty bird. This bird doing its kind of fan dance here is a young or female American redstart. The females or young have yellow tails. Here's a magnolia warbler, a northern parula, and yeah, yellow-throated vireo, another bird that breeds in our area and migrates to the tropics. And then the mother load of northern cardinals came in. We were starting to see the first of the winter visitors like ruby-crowned kinglet there. There's a very drab-looking eastern towhee on the right, joined by a migratory Swainson's warbler, and grey catbirds, which leave the Athens area in the winter, but in somewhere like Charleston would stay year-round. Some of you might recognize that black and orange bird, Baltimore Orioles. Although most of those go down to the tropics, places like Savannah and Charleston, these birds like to eat, they'll eat grape jelly if you provide that for them, but they'll eat any kind of winter fruit, but also nectar. So they love feeding camellia flowers. So definitely something to look out for in Charleston in the winter. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of show you over a period of, I guess I've been in the house about 14 years now. This is what the backyard looked like when I got there. So I got rid of the invasives and I started to sort of build out little islands of habitat, and I tried to establish shrubs and small trees, things like Yorpon hollies, native azaleas, sweet shrub, and so on, to create some habitat structure. My pond is over there to the left of the shed, so I can kind of sit in my screen porch and look down that stream at all the warblers. And then I thought lawns are overrated, so I shrunk the lawn a good bit, and just this past fall, I've shrunk it even further and started to put a lot more of those like perennial flowers in there. So you can see the yard is now very 3D. So there's lots of different habitat structures and types that birds will like to use. Hopefully in about a month from now, this is what the backyard will look like. There's some spring ephemeral flowers in here, like foam flower, and you can see the first flame azaleas just starting to bloom there. The front yard, you might call that a lawn. I had a pretty threadbare lawn when I first moved in. And then some species like Nandina or heavenly bamboo, which isn't really a great plant for wildlife. The berries contain trace amounts of cyanide, so even though it's a pretty plant, if birds ingest enough of them, it can be toxic to them. So I'd recommend replacing that plant if you have it. So, you know, my front yard looked like every other one on my street, so it had a bit of a lawn. So I was a little bit nervous about how shrinking the lawn would appear. So I started doing that very piecemeal, where I put in these raised beds, and sort of one raised bed at a time. I started shrinking the lawn until a few years ago, it completely disappeared into this profuse prairie of wildflowers. So yeah. So cone flowers, bee balms, all sorts of summer flowers that are really attractive to butterflies, bees, and moths. I did at this point think maybe I've gone too far. So one thing I've sort of started to do in more recent years, I wasn't a gardener by training. I didn't really know any of these plants. I wasn't really sure how tall they were going to get. So while I reveled in creating this jungle at first, what I've tried to do in the last couple of years is I've started moving those plants around. And so the plants closest to the road are going to be things that grow no more than sort of knee height. And I'm trying to create a more sort of layered look. So you know, I still let the plants, you know, grow to their fullest potential in the backyard, but I do a little bit of trimming in the front, again, to sort of keep the neighbors on board with this. And yeah, you know, learning about native plants was interesting in itself. I was kind of amazed at the response of the number of birds I saw, the number of bees and butterflies I saw. But, you know, you can also, as you start to learn your birds and start to observe them, you can actually make that information go a lot further and help us paint a kind of nationwide picture of how birds are doing. There are a number of community science apps like eBird, or iNaturalist, where they have smartphone-based apps, so you can record what you're seeing in real time and submit those to databases that let us know how bird numbers and bird distributions are changing through time across seasons and years. In the winter, you can participate in Project Feeder Watch, run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And a really fun event if you're just getting into your birding and learning your birds. Usually around Valentine's Day, this year it's around February 17th to the 20th, is the Great Backyard Bird Count. So you can count birds wherever you are in your backyard, or even if you're out on one of these really cool sounding field trips, you can submit your sightings. And it's a really good introduction to interacting with these community science projects. One thing I found pretty gratifying as someone who loves birds and studies birds as well are the things that we learn. So here's a great cheek thrush, a bird that breeds in Alaska, winters down in South America, and it's pretty unusual in my yard. So I was very happy to see one. And if you look very closely at this picture, you might see on that leg it's got a metal band on it. So researchers will put these bands on birds in the hope that these birds will be recovered somewhere else or returned to their breeding site, so we can estimate how long they live or where they go. So I thought, wow, this is good. I wonder if I can get close enough to read this band. So I tried to sneak up to this bird, and I got all these photos that sort of look like hieroglyphics, but I looked at enough of these birds and I asked a few people to verify for me. I was able to read enough of the band numbers on this bird to identify that same bird had been seen, same individual bird had been caught and fitted with that band 6 weeks prior, 900 miles to the northeast in Connecticut. So I absolutely love that sort of connecting of the dots and you know, figuring how far and how fast these birds can move. This might not look like the most interesting bird you've ever seen, but to bird watchers in Georgia, it turned out to be a very interesting bird. This is called a Bell's vireo. This was actually the 5th record ever for Georgia and it showed up in my yard one fall and spent a whole 9 days there, to the delight of people that were driving in from Savannah and Atlanta and all over to see it. This was species number 152, the 152nd species of bird in my yard. And over the time I was there, it was really fun to watch this bird and study it. It was gratifying as well to see that it was fully taking advantage of the buffet of all these native plants. So I saw it eating caterpillars. In the middle, it's eating a ladybug, which probably didn't taste that great. And then it was also eating berries of things like beautyberry and that devil's walking stick. So it seemed like it found its way into the middle of town in Athens, but then stayed for the native buffet. So just to close out, I wanted you to think about when you're developing your backyard and thinking about the aesthetic. We typically think about the vegetation structure, but you're not just growing plants, you're growing insects and birds and other wildlife that will use your yard. So if you consider those those other elements of biodiversity, birds, pollinating insects, as part of the aesthetic of your yard, then that's really useful for helping you decide what kind of plants you need and what kind of structures that you need. And again, I'd like to sort of emphasize that if you want your yards to be wildlife friendly, think about little corners of your yard where it's okay to leave things a bit messy, where you can keep all of your dead leaves, or where it's okay to leave dead stems and seed heads, both as food for wildlife and overwintering habitat for wildlife. And when you start on this native gardening journey, I was a bit apprehensive about what my neighbors would think. I don't live in a neighborhood that has a homeowners association. That might be a different ball game. But generally, what I found was by being outside a lot in my front yard and tinkering, I think sort of psychologically that reassured people that this habitat was being maintained and cared for. It wasn't neglected or left to grow. And people would always be asking me questions about, what I was seeing, what was flowering. And when this rare bird showed up, it turned into a bit of a neighborhood party, and everybody came over to see what all the fuss was about. And during the pandemic, when I couldn't actually get out to all the places I'd like to go looking for birds, I started really appreciating the birds that were finding their way to my yard. So even though I couldn't travel to see these birds were traveling through anyway, and then stopping by to pay a visit helped me feel connected to the older world. So I started a little Instagram page where I posted all of my bird sightings and bees and butterflies and such in the summer. And so just to close out, I wanted to give you a quote from Doug Tallamy, who's a scientist and popular science writer, who's very passionate about this idea that if we all take a little bit of action collectively, even small changes we make in our yards and how we manage our landscapes can make a big difference for biodiversity. So he said that if Americans converted half of their lawns into wildlife habitat, that would comprise more than 20 million acres, which would be the equivalent of 10 Yellowstone national parks. So I hope this inspires you. Even if you just put in one native flower bed, I promise you in a year or two, you'll start to see all sorts of wildlife that perhaps you hadn't appreciated was in your neighborhood. So yeah, with that, I'll thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
The audience, it's got a question. What's your Instagram page?
Oh, I tried to make a pun. I wanted it, my surname's Hall, H-A-L-L. I wanted it to be hologram, like hologram, but that was already taken, so it's Rich Hologram. So Rich Hall hologram. So that's sort of been a fun documentation of all the different species that have shown up. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Having to do with the music by Rayfon Williams, The Lark Ascending.
Oh, yes.
Since you're British, perhaps you could tell us about this bird species.
So the bird species in question is the skylark. So we don't have those natively in the US, although there is an introduced population on Vancouver Island in Canada. But these are birds that sing on the wing, so they sort of fly up from the ground and do these kind of undulating flights while they're singing. They were an iconic sound of farmland, and you know, they used to be incredibly common. Essentially, any open land would have skylarks. You know, even the marshes in the east of London would have skylarks. But they're one of the species, you know, since the 1960s, and with declines in insects and changes in agricultural practices, that's become a much less frequent sound these days. But yeah, an iconic grassland bird, maybe not much to look at, but it doesn't really need to look good when it sounds as good as it does. Yeah.
So I have a big back corner that is full of weed, litter and shrubs and whatever.
Yeah.
And one thing I have there, you have yet to mention, I have number of snakes that live back there too.
Aha.
You don't ever get snakes in your yard?
I do.
Mention them.
Yeah, I have to say, my yard is pretty urban, so the main snakes I've seen are black rat snakes, which I'm very happy to have around actually, and also brown snakes, the case brown snakes, which are tiny, really cute, like little insect eaters. I guess here in the coastal plains and in a more natural setting, you know, some of the snakes you get might be a little more exciting. But you know, I'm always happy to have them around. They're a part of biodiversity. They all have a role to play. They can help in sort of regulations of rodents and other pests. And my experience of them, you know, in the Athens area, we do have copperheads, for example. And my experience is, you know, provided you give them a respectful distance, I've never really had to worry about them. If ever there is a situation where you find there's a venomous snake that takes residence in a place you're not happy with, like under your porch or something, there's usually somebody that you can call, you know, maybe from the Department of Natural Resources or Fish and Wildlife, who would be happy to move that snake. But for the most part, you know, if I'm lucky enough to see a snake, I generally tend to appreciate it and let it go about its business.
From online, let's take one. How many gallons of water are in your,
Ooh, yeah, that's
or
a good.
just talk about your pool.
Yeah, so my pond setup, I have a pump, and I think it can pump something like, you know, 50 gallons a minute or something at maximum capacity. But I've got a pond that I'll let you do the math on the number of gallons. The pond itself is about 6 feet wide. It's a circular pond, so it's kind of 6 feet diameter. It's maybe 4 feet deep at its deepest point. And then I've got the pump that circulates the water sort of up an 8 foot stream, and the stream is, you know, it's maybe just like half an inch to an inch of water in there. If you want to, you know, make those water features maximally attractive to birds, especially some of those birds that spend their time up in the treetops, think about putting your pond in a place where birds feel comfortable getting down, so they don't feel too at risk of predators. So my pond is kind of underneath the sort of low-hanging branches of a water oak. And actually some of the fallen branches of that I've kind of used as a bit of yardscaping on the side to create perches for the birds to come down to. And that will help them find it. You don't have to, if you don't want if you actually don't want to go the whole hog of having a pond, you can still build these little streams. You can buy something called a pondless waterfall kit, where they'll give you the pump and the reservoir and the PVC piping, and then I think all you'd need would be the landscaping rocks and the planting around it to create that. But I was quite happy to have the pond. I have green frogs and leopard frogs in there, and 3-lined salamanders breed in the pond as well. So adds another dimension to the wildlife.
Are you using city water or well?
It was used with city water, so it's kind of self-contained. Yeah, I'll top it up just using city water. And when I first put it in, you can get these pond starter kits that contain some of the kind of beneficial microbes to kind of seed the pond. But I find that I think the movement of the water, it's like constantly sort of aerated. So I've never sort of had really any issues with build-up of algae or yeah, issues with kind of like the water sort of discolored. It seems to function pretty well. And the only time I really need to top it up is kind of in the summer and fall. Usually a good rain is enough to kind of keep it going. Yeah.
Wanted to say hello, fellow University of Georgia graduate,
Ah,
3 times over. Of course, is what Mr. Odom.
oh my goodness, wow.
But you know, that we in the Low Country face special challenges. It's a different environment. Have to spend time working in happen authoritatively as you can. But live oaks, for example, they drop their whether magnolias, they drop their leaves. They don't decay very quickly. With the kind of popular trees that people like to plant and their compatibility with some of the stuff you're talking about. In fact, I would take the question a bit further in terms of species choice, in terms of percent of lawn that gets planted, area, yard area that gets planted. Birds we all know like edges, and I noticed your yard has a fair amount of lawn or open area as part of it. You know, a lot of our new developments say that we can't have trees, very large trees, greater than 35 feet apart. And so that creates a different kind of environment. So I guess I'm arguing for the sun a little bit as part of your planning, because that kind of environment seems to be better for the birds as well as the plants.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's true. I mean, to a slightly smaller extent, I do have some trees that produce leaf litter that decomposes sort of really nicely. But several of the large trees in my house are water oaks, and so even though they're not evergreen, actually the leaves stay pretty like dry and crunchy for a very long time. But I have found now with a variety of kind of smaller shrubs, things like beautyberries and sweet shrubs, that they seem to produce a nice kind of leaf litter. If you're in a situation where you can't have sort of tall trees.
Also, maybe culling some of those leaves would be a good idea. We also get a lot of mosquitoes with a lot of leaves on them, which is another issue.
Just don't have enough birds.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Do you know which mosquitoes are these, like the tiger mosquitoes?
The ruby-throated, no, I don't.
Yeah, interestingly, I used to have a fair few mosquitoes when I first moved to Athens, but actually these changes in our climate where we have these sort of protracted periods of multiple weeks without rain, the larval breeding habitat, our most pesky urban mosquito is the Asian tiger mosquito, and they actually, they can breed in a thimble of water. They wouldn't really want to be in my pond even. They like, little tree holes and, block gutters and things like that. And we found that it dries up enough in the summer. We go weeks without mosquitoes because the larval habitat disappears over that amount of time. But yeah, the moving water helps with that. But yeah, I suppose there is this tension that in the hottest part of the day, sometimes a mosquito might go to some of these shrubs to kind of hide out in the hottest part.
Congratulations on your yard list. 152 is very impressive. Question, where are you on your balance between raised beds and the Georgia clay that is your yard? Yeah,
so a lot of the stuff is just planted in the red clay. So yeah, a lot of the things I planted early on, like York on holly, I just kind of persevered and dug through that. And now I've just been putting in the raised beds because I'm lazy. At least the most of the topsoil from that is derived from the compost from the leaves in the yard that I haven't removed. So I have a compost pile and I've been able to sort of see them there. But the raised beds really it's just sort of for that convenience that like at times of year it's really tough to get into that. So.
My yard was in worse shape than yours before picture. And I'm curious, how long did it take before you felt like you'd made a difference? You were working, you didn't do this all at once.
So when you say make a difference, were you talking about in terms of removing any invasives, or when I started to see like an uptick in birds, or
however you want to.
Yeah, because it was very gradual. The thing about the humid south where it's almost tropical, some things grow very fast, very quickly.
Not talking about kudzus and invasives.
No, but I'm talking about some of the asters and sunflowers that I planted them in the fall, and then the next year they're like 8 feet tall and spreading. So some of the perennial beds, I felt like they established like pretty quickly, like a year or so after I planted them. Plants like elderberry that also like as a shrub that grew like pretty fast. Some of the other things I've planted, like I put a black gum in my yard, and I feel like that's growing like 6 inches a year or something, not very fast. And I haven't won the battle against the invasives. Yards in my neighborhood have bamboo on the side, so it's just a question of pushing them to the edges. I just tackle bits of the yard bit by bit. Starting closest to the house and sort of working back. It was a student house before I found it, so once I started whacking back the bamboo, I found like a mattress and golf balls and things. So it was a very, very interesting experience.
You've had a question for a while.
Is there a hummingbird that stays around here all year round?
You can see hummingbirds year round. I suspect it's not the same individual birds. So ruby-throated hummingbirds are here in the summer. There are a couple of ruby-throated hummingbirds that will stick around all winter, but the chances are they've come from somewhere else, and you've just seen like a changing of the guards. But yeah, somewhere like Charleston with a pretty like mild winter, lots of flowers, native and non-native, available. You can see hummingbirds in any month. Yeah.
I have hummingbirds all winter long, and they would sit in the branches when we had snow a year ago. It's going to torture, and I had to keep buying out the feeders to feed them. They stayed here year round for at least the last 10 years. Same ones. So don't put your feeders away. Keep your feeders out. And these are pretty.
Right. Yeah. So you can keep feeders out. Studies of hummingbirds that have been banded have shown the feeders aren't. They're not stopping ruby-throated hummingbirds migrating. Again, we have our summer ruby-throats, and they tend to be moving on for the winter, and then others arrive to spend the winter with us. And a sugar water feeder can be really useful for them, especially during a cold snap. The only thing I'd recommend is, if you feed birds, especially if you feed hummingbirds, please be vigilant about changing out the sugar water, because it can mold. The nice thing about doing kind of the native yard is I feel like in the summer I have enough kind of flowering that the hummingbirds are finding all that they need. And I found that like in Athens, if I left my sugar water out for like 3 or 4 days in hot, humid weather, it would start to mold. So I kind of just took my feeders down in the summer, and I put them back up in the fall when there's lots of hungry hummingbirds migrating through. And then I leave them up in the winter, and every once in a while, a winter hummingbird will show up.
Can you give us some shade plants for birds?
Shade plants for birds, yes. So yeah, my backyard is sort of part shade to full shade. For the hummingbirds, cardinal flowers grow very well in the shade. I've actually found beautyberry does like American beautyberry does like pretty well in the understory as well. Yeah, the things that grow in my backyard under the oak canopy would include beautyberry and the Yorpon hollies do fine under the canopy as well, so provide winter interest in berries for the birds. I've got, the black cherry, the Carolina black cherry. That's not something I planted. It found its way into the yard and is is doing really well.
You have a lot of birds planting things.
And yeah, I suppose in terms of shrubs and such, they do seem to prefer part sun to sun. But I have a whole bunch of flowering plants that do like pretty well in the shade. So I've got a lot of spring ephemerals like trilliums, bloodroots, Virginia bluebell. There are a whole bunch of shade plants. I mean, I think the thing to do would be to go to a website like Plants for Birds, because they'll actually say what shade levels tolerated. But yeah, generally, I've found in my yard that I've sometimes just tried my luck with plants that are listed as part shade and planted them in an area that I think is pretty shady. And maybe they don't produce the profusion of flowers and berries that they would in a place that they're truly happy, but they still provide that sort of like habitat structure.
Okay.
So yeah.
So yesterday I noticed that an oriole was hanging out in the backyard, doing kind of fly over this dried mealworm thing that I have hanging on the back door.
Yep.
Can I expect those to hang around to nest, or is he just kind of on his way through?
No, they'll spend the winter. They don't nest here. If you do see an oriole in the summer, we have orchard orioles, which look a little bit similar, like a little bit smaller, and they will nest in our area. But these Baltimore orioles are just winter visitors. And there's been this interesting phenomenon of birds like Western US birds, instead of heading due south into Mexico, they've started coming southeast. So sometimes we'll see birds like Western kingbirds, where here we have a breeding Eastern kingbird in the summer and Western kingbirds are showing up. And if you're in a neighborhood that has a lot of orioles, sometimes people are getting Bullock's oriole, which is the Western counterpart of the Baltimore oriole. And not all of the winter hummingbirds are going to be ruby-throated. You might see something like a rufous hummingbird. And as you mentioned, they can actually withstand the cold. They have this mechanism of going into torpor, like slowing their heart rate. Physiologically, they can survive the cold, but in those rare events where it gets super, super cold, you do have to be careful about making sure the sugar water doesn't completely freeze solid. I bought a little bulb that I put on a bungee cord under my hummingbird feeder, and that seemed to do the trick.
Hate to steal your thunder, but this question is for Charlene, native plant supplier locally here, and has a tent that she'll be setting up with shade-grown plants and sun-grown plants. When will be your next sale this season, or your first sale, I should say?
Sales will begin in early March. Don't yet have anything scheduled for early March, but will happen.
But we can check your brand new website, can't we?
Thank you for the plug, Rebecca. If you go to www.nativeplantsttp, which stands for .com. I have an events page, and right now it's a lot of talks. So I will be giving a talk in April to all of you here that I'm going to have to take some bird stuff out of and put more beef and butterfly.
Sorry.
But it's great that I could broaden the topic, so.
That was nativeplantstTP.com,
Oh.
correct?
Yes.
Okay, just checking.
Native plants, TTP. Well, yeah, thank you. I mean, it's wonderful to have resources where people can buy native plants and learn more about them. And you know, they're just so beautiful. Every spring I'm always just so happy to see what's coming up and how the flowers change through the season. And you know, in our parts of the world, you know, spring is kind of starting in the Athens area. Our first hepaticas are just like poking up now, and you know, by the end of this month, we'll be seeing bloodroot, leafing out in the woods and stuff. So we're lucky to have such a long growing season, and definitely something to consider as you're planting your yard as well, thinking about having color and interest and food for insects and birds that spans a really long season.
For the people at home, just so you know, they were talking about in the audience that the native plant sales will be starting in March in the Low Country. And I put on the chat, someone actually in our audience owns a native plant company, Native Plants to the People. So I put that link on the chat. Oh yeah, we could put some in the newsletter as well next month. That's a good idea.
One more plug is the South Carolina Native Plant Society has a sale where they bring all of the local native plant vendors from the whole region to, I believe it will be Fort Johnson. We're currently setting up that because we've been rotating locations. We used to have one permanent location. It's so much easier, but it will probably be Fort Johnson, possibly the last Saturday of March, but that's still up in the air. But if you go to the website, it will be posted within a few weeks.
So look for the South Carolina Native Plant Society. They will be having a sale at Fort Johnson this coming spring. So last weekend in March, maybe? Possibly, it's not really set yet, so. Okay, they're meeting Monday to decide.
Charlestown Landing.
That was us.
Oh,
Yes, we are no longer holding them there.
It will no longer be at Charlestown Landing. Okay, that's good to know because I've been there for that one.
Okay, we got another question.
What other wildlife do you see besides birds and insects? Are you going to be attracting in a garden like yours?
Yeah, let's see. So you know, in the leafleter, so you know, I've used you know, fallen tree limbs to kind of line paths in the yard, and sometimes when I turn those over, I'll find, you know, salamanders under there. I find tree frogs in the shrubs and trees.
Like bigger animals?
Let's see. I don't have turtles in my yard. I mean, you know, it all depends on context. But yeah, I've seen you know, rabbits, raccoons, you know, opossums, armadillos. I am quite lucky that I don't have as many white-tailed deer as many other spots in. I live near a pretty major road junction in town, and that seems to. I have seen a deer in the front yard once, but only once, which is a boon. So my biggest sort of grazer, I think, are these rabbits that, you know, sometimes I'll have a nice little plant like a Barbara's button. It'll just be about to flower and then. But you know, it went to a good home. But yeah, lots of insect diversity. Yeah, you know, squirrels, chipmunks, and then yeah, reptiles like green anoles, you know, skinks. Yeah, a good mix. And you know, the pond has been really good for amphibians, and I also have a couple of breeding dragonfly species in there too. So
Very good. So we've got pecan, and.
oh, pecan.
Did y'all hear that when he said it earlier? I had to bring that up. So now we have a third one. There's always this debate about whether it's pecan or pecan. Now we've got, that's great. Well, Richard, thank you very much. That was fabulous. Thank you to all, in the audience here and online. And we hope you have a great night and we hope to see you again next month.
And we got a
Oh.
door prize,
Wait a minute, it's February. Oh, don't forget the oyster roast.
door prize.
Your door prize tonight?
Yeah, just give it away.
Oh, okay. I thought it was for the oyster roast.
No. It's like-
We have a door prize. I don't know how we're gonna get this thing away. It's a book.
It's a book.
I can take it out and read it first.
Well, I give it to you then.
Okay, John Muir's Wild America. All right. There were about 30 people in the audience. I have a number in my head from 1 to 30. How about that? Go. 17. 21.
15.
Here. That was pretty good.
There's biology Jeopardy across the hall and.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you again.
thank you.
And we have a sign-in sheet back on the corner, so if you haven't signed it, you have a minute, please go sign in.